So just to recap, this is the block that I had pinned on my Pinterest board, and in part 1 of the video I showed you how I recreated it in Canvas, made it a slightly different size and a slightly different design. In this part 2 video I'm going to show you how I cut it all and how I assembled it all. So I've got some scraps of fabric lined up on my fabric mat, and I'm going to try and cut these out with the ScanNCut now. Okay, so that's finished, so I'll unload the mat. This one's just caught on a thread there, so I'll just release that. Just on the bottom. So I'll just show you these. So I need 8 of these triangles in patterned fabric, and I need 8 of these squares. So I'm just going to carry on now and cut the rest, and then I'll come back. Okay, I'm not sure how well you can see this because it's a bit of an odd weather day again here. But basically I've got a piece of white fabric now on this mat that's 12 inches wide, and as you can see, longer than the mat. And I've brought the quilting pattern that I made in Canvas onto my screen, the sections that are all going to be cut in white. Now there are too many to cut on the mat in one go, so I've positioned as many as I can on the screen, and I'm going to cut them out of this, and then I'm just going to go back into the pattern and reload the missing bits and then cut the rest of them out all in the white fabric. I've got all the pattern pieces all cut out here now, and then I just need to rearrange them and see which ones I want to use. I've cut a couple of extras because I'm not sure what colour pattern configuration I'm going to do it in yet. So this is my fabric mat now. This is the mat that I showed in a recent video that I applied the high tack adhesive contact sheet onto. So this fabric's got nothing ironed on the back. I've done nothing to it. It's not been stabilised or anything like that. So I'm going to say OK and then just send this to cut. Okay, so that's finished now. So I'm just going to unload the mat. For the most part, they seem to have cut through. I've not cut this fabric before, so you know, this is new to me, and to be honest with you, I didn't do a test cut. I just left the settings from when I'd cut the patterned fabric. So most of them appear to have cut fine. There's just a couple that have just caught on a few places, which I can quite easily just snip away. That one's come away. This one, I'm not sure whether you'll be able to see it, but it literally is just hanging on by a thread. So that's that one. So if I spread the fabric out on my desk and then we can see where I need to cut it, it literally is just threads that are holding the fabric in place. And this is 100% cotton. This is a quilting cotton. This one's just caught in a couple of places, so I'll just work my way along. It's not easy to see. The weather here is very, very changeable. It's bright, bright sunshine at the moment, but for days we've had snow and heavy rain and all sorts of things. So there's the waist. So what I'll do now, I'll trim away this and I'll just go and load the last couple of pieces that I need in the white fabric. But you know, here's the fabric all cut. I'll put all my pieces together, and then once I've got everything cut, I can start to have a look how I'm going to arrange it to piece it all together. So I've got all my pieces cut now, all my white pieces and all my pattern pieces, and I've got my little diagram, which is what I drew on some graph paper, just to remind me where all the pieces go. So I'm just going to lay them out and see how they look. So I may speed up this process. Okay, so that's how it's looking so far. I've got a couple of pieces left over. I'm not sure whether to swap some of these out, but I'll play around with it, and when I've got the final configuration, I'll take a picture of it on my phone, and then I'll know when I come to want to start to sew it all together how it's all going to go together. Left, I've swapped out two of the pieces, the triangle and a square, and I've got everything laid out. I've taken a photograph on my phone so I know how it's all set out, and then what I'm going to do now is start to sew it all together. So I'm going to sew the first two rectangles to the half square triangle and work my way along the top row. Then I'm going to work my way through the second row, sewing the half square triangles, the two small squares together, and just work my way along this row. Repeat the same on row 3 and 4, and then sew all the rows together. Okay, so I've got all my pieces here lined up on top of each other in pairs, right sides together. I'm now going to start to sew them all together. I've got my machine set up for a 1/4 inch stitch, and I've got the 1/4 inch foot on, and I am literally just going to chain piece these all together. Now, if you're an experienced quilter, then this video probably won't be any help at all to you. But if you're new to quilting and patchwork, then chain piecing basically just means sewing your seam and then, without removing it from the machine, feeding your next piece under, and that is what I'm doing here. So I'll fast forward through this bit. When I've got them all sewn together, I'll show you at the end, and then I'll press them all. So I'm just nearly at the end now. I'm just finishing off the last piece, and then I'm going to remove this all from the machine. You can see that I've got them all chain pieced together, and now I'm going to cut them apart and press them. So I've got my little ironing board set up here. I'm just going to snip all these little pieces apart now. Once I've got them all apart, I'm going to be ready to start to press them all. So I'm just taking each piece and giving it a quick press on the seam, and then opening it up and pressing it out, and I'm going to work my way through all these pieces that I've just sewn, and then I'll be able to move on to the next part of the project. So I've got all my pieces. I've got my phone with my photograph on from earlier, which is going to help me now to lay all these pieces out. And I'm just going to start to lay them all out, and then once I've got them how I like them and they're all rearranged how I want them, I will then start to sew everything together. So I've got them all more or less laid out as I want them, but I've realised that I've sewn one of the small squares incorrectly. So I'm just going to have to unpick it and re-stitch it, because my little bird would end up upside down if I didn't. So here's the last piece now, all sewn correctly, and what I'm going to do now is just start to sew the pieces together. So I'm going to sew row by row. So I'm going to start with the two top pieces and sew them together. Then the two sets of small squares with the half square triangles, and I'm going to work my way through section by section. So I've got the first two pieces under the machine here, and I'm going to start to sew with a 1/4 inch seam, and I'll fast forward through this, and when it's all sewn I'll show you how it's looking so far. So I've got the first 2 rows all sewn together so far, so I just thought I'd give you a quick look at how that's looking. I'm going to carry on, and then when all the rows are finished I'll come back and I'll show you what it all looks like. Okay, so I've got it all sewn together. I'm just giving it a quick press, and then I'm going to open it out and show you how it all looks. So this is the finished patchwork design now, which I'm just going to give another quick press. Make sure that all the seams are all lying nice and flat, and then it's going to be a case of just measuring it, making sure it's the right size, and then I will have a look at putting the sashing on. Okay, so here it is. So I'm just going to give it a quick measure and see if it's the right size, and I'll just measure it across all the blocks. So that's 12 3/8, and that's 12 2/8, and that's 12 3/8, and so is this row. So it looks as though it's 1/8 of an inch out on the bottom row, which will be my fault, not the ScanNCut's fault. Just double checking it the other way, because obviously there's a sashing to be added on that's got to be sewn on, which should make it a 12-inch block, and it will be. So I'm going to put sashing strips around all 4 sides at 2.5 inches wide. So this is the white fabric that I used on the block. I'm just trimming up this one little edge so that I can now flip the fabric over, and I'm going to be cutting my sashing strips from this. I'm going to cut them at 2.5 inches wide, and I'm going to be cutting 4 of them. I'm cutting them the width of the fabric, which is longer than I need, but I would rather cut them bigger than them be too short. Now on my ruler here, I'm lining up the bottom edge, which I know is a straight edge, with a line that's on my ruler, and I've got the ruler set at 2.5 inches. So I'm just going to cut the 4 strips that I need to go around this block. Okay, I've got the 4 pieces cut now. I'm just going to show you how I'm going to position them, but basically I've cut them bigger than I need, but I'd rather have them bigger than I can trim them down. And I'm going to sew opposite sides first, so I'll sew the top and the bottom, trim the sashing, and then add on the sides. So I'm just going to start to sew the first piece of sashing down one side. I'm going to take my time and do this because I don't want to rush it and ruin it now. So I'm just lining up my 2.5 piece strip along one side, and I'm going to work my way down until I get to the end, and then I'll show you how it looks. So here it is. I'm just going to turn it round now, and on the opposite side sew another of the 2.5 inch piece strips. Right, so I've sewn the top sashing and the bottom sashing on, and I've trimmed those to the size of the quilt, and now I've laid my side pieces on. I like to leave an overhang so I can trim it back once it's all sewn, and obviously it's longer than I need here. So now I'm just going to sew down here with a 1/4 inch seam. But I showed you before that I was measuring the quilt in the sections, and it was 1/8 off on this row. I just wanted to show you. I've just squared it up, and that's literally what I've taken off it. So, you know, it's not bad really, that, is it, considering, you know, there's all these different pieces of fabric. It's, you know, it was nearly perfect. Just checking it as I go along. I actually broke a needle earlier on in making this video, and my machine's making a bit of a funny noise now, so I don't know whether I've knocked something out of joint, but I've taken all the bottom bit off here and cleaned it all out, and there doesn't appear to be anything stuck in there, so it's sewing okay. Just making a bit of a rattle. Okay, so that's that done. I'll give it a quick press and then I'll square it up, and then it'll be a case of measuring it and putting the backing. Okay, I'm just going to line the ruler up with the edge of the sashing here. So I've got a straight line along the sashing, and then line up this edge here, and then trim. And I'm going to do the same on here. So I'm going to line an edge up on my ruler on the edge of the sashing, so I know I've got a straight edge, line it up with the fabric and trim, and just do that on both sides. And there it is, all finished. I think it looks great. So give it a quick measure. So that measures 16. Yeah. Just turn it round. And that's 16 1/8, which, you know, 1/8 out isn't bad really, is it? So that's how it's looking. So I know this has been a bit of a long process because I've actually, you know, made this over a few days, but I hope that you found it helpful. A couple of people have said in some of my videos recently that they wished I'd show the process from design, from ScanNCut canvas right through to making and creating. So that's what I'm doing in this video. So it's going to end up being in 3 parts. But basically what I'm going to do now, this is going to be the end of part 2. In part 3, I'm going to cut the fabric to make an envelope style backing for this, because this is going to be a cushion. So I'm going to cut my fabric for this now at 17 inches wide by about 11 inches, and I'm going to cut 2 pieces of fabric, and that is going to make my envelope style backing. I've done cushions in an envelope style before. It's basically where you have a piece of fabric here and a piece here, and they kind of overlap here, and you open them up and tuck your cushion in. So obviously if you know how to do that, part 3 is not going to be any use to you. But if you want to know how to do that, that will be in part 3. And this is actually going to be a cushion for me. So I hope that was helpful. Please give the video a thumbs up if you liked it. Don't forget to subscribe if you don't already do so. And hopefully I'll see you in part 3 when I finish the cushion and put it all together.